Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Man at YouTube with another model review. The 1/72 Victory Gundam. Now, I received this kit from a good friend in a chocolate box, a Ferrero Rocher clear case. It came from some sort of storm damage in a hobby store in Malaysia. A friend named Willie Wong, who is a notorious model trader in the Australian and Melbourne scene. He's definitely been around in other countries and communities. This was presented to me as a hamper Christmas box, not knowing exactly what the kit, how many parts and whatnot. I believe it is the B Club kit, the picture provided by Gundam 00 Reviews, Ed, who has bought something similar at a trade shop in the US. The first job was to lay out all the parts to identify what we're working with. Very quickly, by the study of the legs and chest, I worked out this was the Victory Gundam, and knowledgeable loosely off looking at wikis and heights and off memory, it's a very short Gundam. Could easily be confused as a 1/100 scale kit, though through a bit of Google foo, found out that the scale was akin to 1/72. Downloading the line art, which you saw at the start of the video, I was able to figure out that the kit is sculpted based off the original anime proportions and the line out as presented. This made things pretty easy and counted the parts and did a very basic layout test fit to see if everything was present, which it was. A couple of extra unnecessary parts included. Right off, once we've confirmed total parts count, it's very challenging to work with no official instructions, parts breakdown, or a kit that someone has worked on. There was evidence of a few pieces having nubs and whatnot removed in a crude fashion. This was quickly rectified. We gave it the traditional wash with detergent, water, a good soak and a good scrub down of the parts, as well as a light sanding. All the visible nubs were identified, marked and removed, as well as points where I will pin and drill, marked out with a marker. Anywhere else that I could add alligator clips to hold the parts up for painting that was not visible after assembly were drilled using 3mm drill bits. Now, the condition of the kit, this is a resin garage model and of a very early vintage. The casting is not the best. We do have no air bubbles visible, and it is complete, though a very heavy release agent was applied in the mold, leaving quite a funny texture. A lot of sanding was required, as well as all the panels being virtually almost completely flatted out. You could tell that the original model was hand sculpted with some imperfections here and there, proportions ever so slightly off, and a very rough texture within connecting parts that will not be visible after assembly. Smaller and very thin parts were very heavily warped, especially the gun barrel, the thrusters, and the rear fins. This required soaking in boiled water and re-straightening out, and a few skinny parts were misaligned as if the molds were not put together correctly, requiring a bit of re-sculpting with putty and a lot of sanding. Flash marks and seam lines were also all over the place. The hips, where the side armour connecting on the very top of the legs, were very thin, and to drill a pin that would attach the side and front armour into the hips was absolutely impossible and completely disintegrated. Sculpting putty was added to allow enough bulk for drilling. Some parts were very small that allowed pinning to be near impossible. I started at the feet, marking where I was going to pin, sometimes drilling all the way through and putting a 1.5mm brass rod in hope that it would stand on its own free will. Due to some restraints, that wasn't exactly quite possible, though as I went along and every dent, hole, mark, imperfection and misfitting I came across was filled with polyester putty, or known as blade putty. It was automotive grade, bought from a general store that came in about a 370ml tin, thinned or cut slightly with a touch of lacquer thinner and applied with a cotton bud. This will take an insane amount of time to dry. However, it latched onto resin quite nicely, being resin based-ish itself. This project was very long term and took more than a year in the assembling process. Once the putty was applied to each piece, and we had so many pieces, I'll put a bit of tape or mark with a marker what is being worked on, what needs to be fixed and what doesn't. I sanded it after a period of time, a day, a few days, a week later. I would work on this during club activities. Sand it with a high grit sandpaper, move along to a higher grit sandpaper around 1000, 2000 grit to polish the surface, followed by rescribing the panel lines so we got quite a deep well for any sort of wash or detailing later on to sit in. This continued with constant retest fitting and adding pins or mounting points for painting, allowing for as much colour separation as possible, though a little bit of pre-assembly did occur with super glue and pinning. After washing, doing a very light buff, priming, putty, sanding, priming, putting, sanding, up to 5 to 7 times on some components that were really messed up. Ideally, we were able to get a smooth finish and deep enough seams to get something that was resembling a model kit. We were able to finally move on to the painting stage. These pieces were very heavy. A steel skewer with an alligator clip was required to support them. The holes drilled into the larger, heavier parts really helped in supporting the parts to stand upright. The very light pieces made sure that it had an extruded pin sticking out where the alligator clip could be stuck on. A final layer of primer, Mr. Surfacer 1000, was applied for maximum etching, as well as a plain colour bed to start working on airbrushing and shading our various colours. Everything used was lacquers, preferably Mr. Hobby, as some SMS thrown there and here. We attempted modulation by using 3 tones of colour for every section. A lot of components did require masking, so we would always spray the lowest section first. Studying the line art again to get the colours right, as well as the shading, I figured out where the bottom and the top of the part was, where light would roughly hit. Spray the colour to neutral middle colour, then shade the darker blue, red, white, whatever on the bottom half, and dust on the top half with the lighter colour. I did not use a true white. Having a look at a few old anime cells, it was off colour, some sort of eggshell green or a very light blue, so white was never used. I would always stick to a light green, light blue colour, and only a true light, white or grey, was shaded and picked up in very small isolated areas, picking up light. Using off-white or non-white colours from a distance gives it an illusion of being a very clean white colour, and I did not even have to mess with the difficulties of painting white, which is fantastic. Patience was definitely applied, especially with the length and time taken to finish this whole project. When 2 or 3 layers were applied, a little bit of time passed before a gloss coat, mostly being an acrylic, was laid down. A week passed, and masking using Tamiya tape in very small squares along the panel lines to separate the various different colours as mentioned beforehand. And the torso required up to 4 layers of different spray jobs, some others 1 or 2. Parts were separated in colours on these boards, as well as complexity in masking. At the end, the black and some very small areas were touched up via hand painting the lacquers and then adding another clear coat on top. With our very subtle light shading, I've decided to do the same with weathering, as we spent quite a bit of time scribing every panel to be far deeper than original for the easy flowing of washes and inks to slide right in. I decided to go for a black wash rather than a grey, as we're dealing with off-whites and really light blues, which gave the same effect as you would get with the line art. Very thick, heavy set black lines. Once that dries, and being an oil wash by SMS, allowed that a few days, applied SMS matte clear, and did a few layers of weathering pencil, or a makeup pencil for eyeliner black to pick up the edges, look like the line art, and a silver pencil which I tapped on the edges all over the place to get a sense of paint chipping. A lot of this was focused around panel lines, edges, and raised areas like the bottom of the feet, knees, likely where buildings would scrape the mech or moving parts would touch each other or touch other debris. A lot of this theory played on what I've studied off Mr. Kawaguchi and a lot of his theory talks. Very subtle, though from a distance it appears to be clean. Up close tells more of a story, and that's the sort of thing a lot of people are looking for, and I wish to attempt to pull off. A bit of dusting and dirt was also applied at the very bottom of the feet, as well as other areas that are likely to touch dirt or earth. The kneecaps, if there was a shield at the edge of that, and whatnot. The lower bits, a very light brown filter was also applied for this effect. The pigment weathering used around areas such as the bottom of the feet, legs, shins came from a women's makeup set. I bought a very generic soft pigment one off eBay with these very tiny thumb size palettes, and it had about 30 different colours, fleshy pink ones to earthy brown tones, snowy white and silver. A lot to really play with, and sandwiched them in between multiple layers of SMS clear matte, which was slowly built up to give a bit of colour from a distance, and closer up you get more of a look. Around areas such as vents, thrusters and whatnot, a touch of clear smoke was run through an airbrush to give a bit of a build-up of heat exhaust or soot flying out, with a touch of burnt iron sprayed right inside. Once a considerable amount of time has passed for all paint, weathering, enamels, whatnot to absolutely fully cure, as I've learnt from some of the master resin modelers like Matt Mosaic and whatnot, go as slow and careful as possible with the final assembly, not to allow scratching, paint chipping, all that sort of thing. Be very patient. And that's exactly what I did. I'll only assemble one or two parts at a time, utilising PVA glue, hoping that the pins would support the majority of the weight, as well as the sheer friction between the rod and the resin for contact. The glue is just holding it together, not allowing it to assemble. Thus why the assembly process took such a long time. I only had to super glue one or two areas where I did a pretty poor pin job. That process alone took a couple of weeks. Now I'm talking a lot about how many sessions, weeks, months, more than a year I've been working on this project. It's true that it's really stretched out, but it was a patience thing. Every session would only be a couple of hours. The majority of them would be in the minutes, such as the assembly thing. A bit of glue, test dry fit, slam together, put aside. Did that about 3 times, did not touch. Some of the painting sessions would be loading up the airbrush, spraying, putting it down, don't look at it, probably half an hour here and there. I could have well easily sunk in over 100 hours into this kit. That was in only small sections here and there over a very long period of time. And as none of it was rushed, I feel that this is probably my most finest work that I've ever produced, and probably what's really ideal that people look into a project like this. This project was a huge challenge and could have easily been a shelf queen where it goes into the work in progress pile and never pulled out again. I've got a lot of vintage resin kits, some far more challenging, complex, rare and more awesome than this. The truth is the kit had no monetary value as the box instructions were missing, unidentifiable, and not even knowing if all the parts was there. I felt it was a bit of a passion project to get this as good as humanly possible, and if I could make this at a very fine standard, some of the ultra rare resin kits I'm sitting on, I can definitely do some sort of justice in finishing it off. And I'm definitely going to jump on my very next big long-term mecha kit, which is this humongous double Zeta with very large, chunky, thick proportions to it. It was very, very difficult, but it was an extremely fun project. Did enjoy it. Even though the project was really hard, I do not feel any aspect of it is out of anyone's realm, skill level, or difficulty range. Just really taking your time, stopping when you have to, getting back to it when you can. I think most people will be able to pull something like this off if they're willing to put the dedication and willingness to commit and finish the project. I hope this video is somewhat inspirational or instructional in attempting resin kits, older or incomplete kits. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned. We do lots of different projects, kit reviews, everything from resin to styrene. I know it's not quite going to get the views worthwhile for the effort put into the video and the construction of the kit, though it's just been that much fun. It's pure pleasure just to share with you all. Thank you and see you later.